today, because everyone's not feeling too sleepy. We're going to end with some practical things that you can do on a small scale to make a big difference. And we've got Liz from Nottinghamshire Wildlife Trust, who I understand has stepped in at the last minute, so be kind to her. And we'll have a few minutes at the end for some questions, and feel free to chip in and share your knowledge.
Thank you. I've had all my expectation management lined up. I don't need to say that anymore. So I started the last talk by saying, obviously, there's a lot of specialism and scientific expertise around this sort of day. And if we look in the sort of generalist here and the specialist here, this continuum, I'm kind of over here, a bit more of a generalist. So my job within the Wildlife Trust is Head of People and Nature, with a big focus on people. I have lots of amazing colleagues who know a lot more about nature than I do, but I have worked in the conservation sector for more years than I choose to think about nowadays. But my role has always been very much around a sort of community engagement, basically. And my colleague who was due to give this talk is unfortunately starting her new job tomorrow. So I am standing in. So how we did the last one was that I'll give the presentation, then rather than a Q&A session, we've got a bit of a, like we've heard, maybe an informal knowledge sharing, which worked very well on the last one. So hopefully you can all chip in. I'm not going to say if there's anything I can't answer, because when there might be things that I can't answer. Anyway, that's the expectation management out of the way. Part of my role within the Wildlife Trust is about encouraging more people to take action for nature and encouraging more people to make space for nature. So actually this talk is one that we kind of take wherever we can, because starting in your garden is one of the best places you can start in terms of making more space for nature. An average garden has over 2,000 insects in it, so very good way of really increasing insect biodiversity across the county, across the country. And there's about 24 million or so gardens across the UK. So really, altogether, that little bit of extra space for nature in everybody's gardens, which is obviously what we'd like to see, can go a huge way to creating more of a kind of living landscape of gardens, really. So I like to think of insects as small but mighty, really. You know, we know they're all there. Some of them we see, some of them are a bit showy. Others are a bit hidden away behind the scenes, you know, doing all those really important tasks that actually help us as gardeners as well. It's great when we don't have to rely on, you know, green waste collections or something like that, because we can create piles and compost heaps and things like that insects will help to break down for us. And as a, I'm going to say, former organic allotment gardener, in terms of, I just didn't have the time for it anymore, in terms of biological control of pests, that was something I was really keen on. I didn't want to use pesticides or anything like that, so I did everything I could to make sure that I had the right plants in there to attract the right insects to help control some of the slightly less helpful insects, shall we say. And in terms of pollination as well, really, really important. We'll say a bit more about that later on. But obviously gardens and insects in gardens can really help in terms of pollination as well. And we know, you know, how much pollinators are at risk as well. And the really interesting one for me, this is almost kind of coming back a long way. I remember when I was a student here back in there, so, you hate it when people go, oh, when I was a student. I remember doing an assignment about seed dispersal, and it was all about which creatures and the, you know, different ways seeds are dispersed. But actually insects can disperse seeds as well. So a lot of insects might eat seeds, and in the course of that might just brush alongside and help that seed along its way into the soil. So that's something that people might not think about quite as much in terms of the role of insects within the garden. So a lot of this is really based around good wildlife gardening practice. practice. I've already mentioned about pesticides. I will bang on about this a little bit because I do think it's the right approach to take if you want more wildlife in your garden. Natural predators, there are a lot of them around, and they will do you a really good job, basically. And if you get the right plants to attract, or the right habitats within your garden, or even the right micro habitats within your garden, you will attract those natural predators. If your garden is big enough, keep your hedges wherever possible, or plant a new hedge wherever possible, because again, not just in terms of maybe some nectar source for insects, but also if you're thinking about that whole garden ecosystem, bit of shelter for birds or other mammals maybe as well. Hedges can be really, really valuable in a wildlife garden. I'm sure I don't need to bang on about the value of going peat free, not just it being good in the garden, but really, really safeguarding those valuable and very, very threatened peatland habitats as well. So wildlife gardening can obviously have that wider benefit. Mentioned composting and insects helping us along those lines, but also collecting water as well. Again, something really positive. I'll come on to ponds later. But as much as we can recycle water, the better, really. Artificial lawns, just going to leave that one there. Don't think we need to say any more. No, I'm not a fan. I'm not sure whether many folks who are attending today are, but very happy to have a conversation about the relative merits if anybody can give me any.
It'd be really good if you got animals.
Okay, thanks. For a wildlife garden. But thank you. I like that. The next one is about weeds. One of the things that somebody said to me once, there's no such thing as a weed, it's just a plant in a wrong place. It's just a plant in the wrong place. And I do like to think of things like that. What might be a weed to one person might be really, really valuable for a pollinator or a particular, particular insect. So don't just think because this is a plant that I don't want in my garden that it doesn't necessarily have value. And everybody knows about No Mow May. Just letting a patch of the lawn grow if you can, either in May or a little bit longer throughout the year as well. The best thing with lawns, if you've got the space, and you don't need to think about your animals that you've got, it's having that different sort of structure of grasses and different flowers and plants within your lawn as well. Keep it tidy where you can, but if you've got that little bit more space, you can leave it a little bit longer. That's really worthwhile. So this is specifically about insects and how we can encourage insects into the garden. Solitary bees are really, really important pollinators, and quite often they don't necessarily have the best space within gardens, so doing a bee hotel is a really, really good thing you can do. Though, interestingly, in the last talk, somebody said don't buy any of them that are sold, because more often than not, the tubes aren't long enough for the bees. So make one yourself, save yourself a little bit of money as well. Most important thing with the bee hotels is make sure there's a mix of diameters. So you can see in this picture, there's a drilled log, but there's also the smaller and wider diameter tubes as well. Put a backing board on it because they don't want an open end on it, and make sure it's hung on a sunny wall. And somebody said earlier that they'd put a dish of water underneath as well for the bees, but the bees had then mixed that with the soil and had used that to fill up the ends. And she was a bit concerned that then the young bees wouldn't be able to hatch out when they're ready, but somebody else said, that'll be absolutely fine.
Bees need water, especially in the hot weather.
Yeah, definitely. So I thought that was a nice little extra to the bee hotel to make sure you have that water there as well. Also, the bug hotels on a little bit grander scale, basically. This is basically my way of using. This isn't one of my photos, but it's a great way of using up stuff that you might not necessarily have a use for. You can put loads of different things in there: hollow stems, stones, tiles, straw or hay, dry leaves, they'll break down eventually, loose bark, anything that you've got lying around really, just to create a really nice mix of habitats. But the most important thing for a bug hotel is to have part of it in the sun and part of it in the shade or in a cooler, more damp spot, because then you're creating the best environment for the most diverse range of insects that you can. And log piles as well. Again, if you've got any dead wood in your garden, really valuable just to create a pile of dead wood, creates overwintering habitat, but also, you might be creating a bit of a buffet as well for some of the things that will feed on the insects in your garden as well. So you're just, again, taking that whole sort of ecosystem approach, really. Pollinators, massively, massively important. Huge threats to pollinators, habitat loss, climate change, overuse of pesticides, over 4,000 species of pollinators in the UK. Let's make sure as many of them can come into our gardens as possible. So again, it's all about the diversity in your garden. It's about having a good range of plants that are nectar rich, but also those plants that will bloom throughout the year. We've got some slides showing some of the best at different times of the year. The structure of the plant is really important as well. So your pollinators will be much better off on the sort of the simple form of plants. Think of some of the old cottage garden varieties, things like that. But also, it's how you plant them. So if you have them in clusters, then your pollinators will find it easier to find them. There'll be more colour, there'll be more scent. So it'll be easier for the pollinators to actually find them themselves. Having anything that's got scent at night, absolutely brilliant. And in the last talk we had Colin, from one of our local groups, who is an absolute moth expert, so I just let him talk about the value of specific plants in the night for moths. But he was also talking about ones that will attract day-flying moths as well. Red valerian, that's the plant that he mentioned. But anything that's night-scented, like tobacco plants or night-scented stock, things like that, they'll be really good for attracting moths into your garden. Native plants, really, really important. But again, also I know that certain organisations like Royal Horticultural Society, they've produced quite a good guide which is saying yes, native plants are really important, but don't feel that you have to be constrained by native plants, because actually other plants that you'll find in your garden can be equally as valuable for pollinators as well. It's not just about bedding or annual plants. Just think about plants across the whole of the garden. Trees and shrubs could be really valuable as well for pollinators. And we come back to learning to love weeds, in inverted commas, because they're just plants in the wrong place. And the other thing is, it's thinking about the wide variety, but which plants are going to be specific to which species as well. Caterpillars can be quite fussy. I remember working on a nature reserve years ago when we did butterfly transects, and there was one specific plant that was valuable for one specific butterfly. This is all in the depths of my memory now. But examples like common blue butterfly needs the bird's foot trefoil, and for small tortoiseshell, stinging nettles all the way. If you can abide a patch of stinging nettles in your garden, I say keep them, because they will help to attract those insects. Mentioned the RHS before. They have some brilliant resources in terms of the best plants that you can get for pollinators. And it will talk about the types of plants, but also flowering season as well. So it is a really, really handy resource. And I don't know about anybody else, but if I'm buying any plants for the garden, I'll always go for the ones that will effectively say this is a pollinator-friendly plant, because those are the sort of things I want in my garden. Mentioned before the moths, jasmine, honeysuckle, tobacco plant, Nicotiana that we mentioned before, and then I've never come across this plant called purple top before, but I know it is Verbena bonariensis, I think. And again, absolutely fabulous for moths. And caterpillars, English oak, holly, ivy. We talked about a lot about ivy in the last talk, because I know, again, some people can see it as a bit of an intrusive plant, but actually it's so valuable for insects in the garden, particularly in the autumn as well. So again, well worth cultivating a patch of ivy if you can. Maybe climbing nicely over your log pile or something like that. In terms of what's best to put throughout the year, things like bugle, field maple as a shrub, it's quite nice, can be reasonably compact. Primroses, who doesn't love a primrose in the garden? Marsh marigolds, if you've got a pond or a damp area particularly. But again, thinking about that different structure as well and what you can have at a different time of the year. In the summer, absolutely abundant, but cornflowers, a bit poppies, oxeye daisies, a bit evocative of those sort of wildflower meadows, if you're wanting to go down that sort of route. But herbs, I love the fact that borage is on here, because I don't know if anybody else has ever put borage in their garden. Bees love it. Takes over. But it is lovely. So again, you might just need to think about how you manage it and maybe control it a little bit, but it is absolutely fantastic for the bees. If you've got the space, I'd definitely recommend a bit of borage in your garden. In the autumn, even dahlias, your real kind of standard garden, really good showy flower, they're going to be really good for pollinators. And we come back to ivy again on here. Japanese anemones as well, not the sort of thing you probably think of necessarily for a really native wild garden, but really valuable for pollinators. And then even stuff in winter, and this is where I really struggle, is just thinking about that year-long interest, really. But things like flowering crocus, snowdrops, hellebores, fabulous for when there is that need for nectar for those insects that are about, maybe quite early in the year as well. So some useful species there, but again, the RHS resources are really valuable on that front. Talked a lot about plants, but insects might really value a bit of water in your garden as well. So really the best thing you can do is create a pond if you've got space for it. If not, we do a lovely activity, which is creating a pond in a washing up bowl. Basically, you can still get that little bit of interest in terms of the water and the insect species that you might get just by having a small amount of, or a very small scale pond in your garden. This is a resource that's on the Wildlife Trust website. It has more steps to it as well. This is I would say the really going for it version, which is you dig your hole and you line it yourself. You can buy a preformed pond liner if you like. This gives you a little bit more creativity. Main thing to remember is make sure you've got different levels in your pond, and make sure you've got somewhere for things that might be interested in the pond but might not necessarily want to be in the pond all the time to get out of the pond if they happen to get a little bit closer to the pond than they might wanted to. So have an escape route basically. But the different levels really important, both for plants and any species that you will have in there as well. Different levels. The thing about best time to do a pond is kind of late autumn or into the winter, and then you really start to see the benefits in the spring. But again, the conversation we had earlier was, is it too late to do it now? No, do it any time of the year. You might just get a bit more value from it next year. But I'd say for a bit of water in your garden will really start to bring that extra interest in terms of the insects. And again, this is a really good guide, whether you've got loads of space or just a little bit of space. Really good resource that in partnership with RHS. Other things to think about. when you're doing your pond is, obviously some people are concerned about safety. If you've got young children, you can just put a grid over it. The main consideration, having seen how devastating the impacts of non-native species are in sort of wider water bodies across the wider countryside, is if you are buying any plants to go in your pond, really have a look to see whether there's any species in there that maybe you don't want to be getting in your garden. And there are things like crassula, which is just everywhere now, but it just regenerates so easily. So do be mindful when you are buying plants. Get your head round what are the things that you really don't want in there, and have a look for those when you're buying your pond plants. Always go to a sort of reputable nursery, or somewhere like Naturescape, which is just brilliant for any plants for wildflower gardens. And again, for a wildlife pond, maybe leave the fish out of it, because you might not see quite so much wildlife in there if you have fish. If you want a fish pond, have a different pond, that's great. But for your wildlife pond, keep the fish out of there. And I've mentioned small spaces as well, because a lot of times we do this. This talk is very much for people who might, just be looking to take their first steps in nature conservation. They might not have a lot of space at all, so it's very much about those sort of micro habitats that you can create, even just planting in pots or a small border, using vertical spaces. Great for climbers. We come back to ivy again, honeysuckle, things like that. Can still have a lot of value for wildlife in the garden, but in a way that doesn't feel that your garden has to be totally taken over. Even though that might be what you might fancy. Even stuff in pots, you can do some really good herbs in pots, basically. Wild marjoram, absolutely lovely. Again, for bees, things like that. And if you're planting mint, always put that in a pot, because you will be digging it up forevermore as well. The last thing to say really is there are more resources than you can, I'm going to say shake a stick at, maybe shake a log pile at or something like that. The Wildlife Trust website's got loads and loads of resources, not just about wildlife gardening, but also taking action for nature. But there's loads more information on all of those things that I've sort of run through here. But also, what we're hoping to do is, like I said at the beginning, just make more space for nature in whatever way we can. And starting with people's gardens is a really good way to do that. And if I could ask everybody, if they are talking to anybody, trying to encourage more people to do more wildlife-friendly gardening, we would love to know what people are doing. So we've got 2 maps. One is for individuals, just to put their garden on or whatever they're doing. And it's just a way of more people saying we're doing more for wildlife, basically, across Nottinghamshire. And this is building our Wilder Nottinghamshire Network. If you're working with a community group, we have a groups map, and that enables groups to put a little bit more information on, where it's just saying this is who we are, this is what we're doing, and then groups can connect with each other as well. And then through the network and the Facebook group, that's another way of groups connecting with each other and just sharing that information and knowledge around as well. So that's my little plug for the Wilder Nottinghamshire Network, but it all starts with people at home and in their communities, basically. So thanks for listening. Instead of any questions, like we said, let's have an informal knowledge share, because you'll probably learn more from it than me standing here going, I might be able to answer that, I might not. So if there are any questions, and if anybody wants to throw in their knowledge and expertise, then we will fire away. Thank you very much.
No, yeah.
Thanks.
As a new beekeeper, I can tell you, the primulus, put those around. The bees just love them, and it's one of the first things throughout the winter time. It makes your garden look nice, and it's great for the bees.
Yeah.
It's there Daffs don't get the double-headed ones because they don't like that. And the ivy, I like what you're saying. We've just created that in the park where we kept the ivy over the log piles, and that does two things. It's great to protect the animals in the log piles, but the other thing it does, ivy is the last thing that the bees can get the nectar from before they hibernate. You know, so that's why at the end of the year the bees are swarming around the ivy, because that's and that basically we don't take the honey at that time. We only take the honey from up to probably around about August time, and everything they collect, because there isn't much that they can really go to. So everything they do after August is they're building up their stocks for their hibernation period.
Primulus, great, thank you.
Yeah, or polyanthers, whatever you want to call them. Yeah, what do you?
No, Primulus. But I didn't realise they were so valued by the bees. But...
Yeah, and of course, if you've got a little bit of the hawthorn, the hedgerow plum, anything that blossoms, they'll.
Yeah. Good stuff. Thank you. See, I knew it was worth doing. Any other questions from folks, or points that you want to share in terms of insects in the garden?
What about wildflowers, Andy?
Well, not necessarily. I'm sure Andy's going to have something.
Yeah. There was reminded me of a couple of things about the hedges and dead wood. But I've got a hazel arch, and I kind of lodged an old acoustic guitar in there.
Okay.
Because I'm a musician. But what struck me is we've had two. I think the robins are in it again this year, but last year or the year before we had a bumblebee nest in there as well.
Oh, wow.
So even the things that you wouldn't think, if you kind of just leave them to go wild. And the other thing that I thought was quite amazing, but you talked about log piles, and I've kind of spent time as a tree surgeon, so I've always got logs, not kind of lying that way, like branches, but substantial amounts of sections of trees. So I've always brought them back over the years, and we've kind of actually got a resident population of lesser stag beetles that have been in the garden. I mean, I live in New Alton, which is a former mining community, but we just get loads of invertebrates and stuff with kind of more natural-based, untidy areas rather than a bug hotel or anything.
I love an untidy area.
Yeah.
I really, if you can cope with that, it is absolutely the best way to do it, isn't it? But I know also it was really interesting what I said earlier. Somebody earlier saying just don't buy the bug hotels and things like that. Make them yourself, because you can make them exactly how you want them. And
the other thing is that sometimes even the bird boxes, it's the timber that are made out of.
Yeah.
They're not necessarily suited.
No, definitely not.
Yeah. And I know Simon said flowers, but my garden has traditionally been shaded.
Yeah.
So we don't get a lot of flowers, but we've got hedges down both sides. And the first thing I did when I moved in was put an oak tree in there, and we get crickets, the amount of insects, and in the beech hedge allow that to grow, but allow the bramble to grow through the hedge as well. You know, so it's a kind of, the neighbours actually love me, not. And on one side it's kind of down, because if a branch goes over into next doors, it's got to come off. But the fact is, I just step it in by about a foot and they can't say anything. So basically, I think the problem with wildlife gardening in any area is the expectation of your neighbours.
Oh, absolutely.
And trees that are absolutely fantastic.
Now that's a really good point, Andy, actually, because I have a dream. One of the things that we're trying to do through the network is kind of encourage more people to be champions in their local area. And I think if every person, if every street had a wildlife gardening champion, that's where I can see it going. That's what I'd like to see happening, because it is, for a lot of folks, it's going to be the closest connection they've got with nature. Might not necessarily be able to get out to a nature reserve or a park or anything like that. So yeah, I do hope that one day we can change that kind of perception a little bit, that you can make space for wildlife in your garden without it being completely wild. But if it is a little bit wild, it's okay.
And I'm not a great gardener. Well,
I'm a terrible gardener.
I shouldn't say that because I do teach horticulture at times. But I'm not.
That's right. I work for the Wildlife Trust. I'm a terrible gardener.
Sitting in the garden and pottering, I kind of like it to just be itself, and just by leaving it and just tweaking it now and again. But I can't emphasise the value of hedges and trees for attracting a range of insects and birds.
Oh, definitely. Yeah. I had somebody told me the other day that they're really keen to get everybody on their street planting a fruit tree in their front garden. Oh, what a lovely idea! That's really nice. So I'm going to follow that up now, will I? See where we can get to.
I think there's a lot more now with this gardening world.
Yeah.
They do a lot more on there now, don't they? About wildlife.
It's definitely less.
Deeply gardening.
Yeah.
So I think
we're getting there.
Getting out there.
Yeah.
To people.
Yeah. We still keep needing to bang the drum, though, don't we? Definitely.
There's nothing like lifting up your compost bin and then seeing a big grass snake in there and you go, oh yeah, that's where he lives. And then put it down.
Yeah.
But no, it's that type of gardening.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Just making whatever space you can, and I think the thing about just doing whatever you can is it's a really important message for us to get across as well, because a lot of the times it's like, oh, Wildlife Trust, nature is theirs. It's like, no, space for nature anywhere, wherever we can do it. That's what we like to see, basically. Yes.
It's just something to add that at the beginning you were saying about the everyone sort of thinking about the greater landscape and everyone doing their bit. It's a fact that I read in Stockham's How to Love Nature and How to Save It, that basically said that everyone's garden in England, I think, adds up to far more space
Exactly.
than the national parks that they've got designation. So if you think of it in that respect, if everyone does their little bit, then it really is adding that value to wildlife. And having just bought a house last year and it just being a mown lawn with no biodiversity, just by leaving the back between the raised bed and the fence, we've got bramble, nettle, nightshade, willow, and we had that elephant hawk moth, and we've got caterpillars just within 1 year. So even just leaving stuff, never mind even planting stuff.
Yeah.
And as you said, it doesn't require that much of your garden to suddenly make it.
No, definitely not.
The hedgehog, suddenly it grows, doesn't it? Suddenly you think, wow, I've got all that wildlife that's here.
Thank you very much for contributing to the discussion. Helps me out an awful lot. But it's definitely everybody's got that bit of knowledge, haven't they? And for me, what we're trying to do through the network is connect people and get people sharing what they're doing. So if you'd like to pop in what you're doing on the map, that'd be lovely. Thanks all.
Thank you.